Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Cassandra Schroeder, Director of the Y-CUP and Global DE programs at the Worldwide Foundation for Credit Unions. And today we're talking about the value of earning the International Credit Union Development Educator designation and the journey that many professionals take through programs like Africa DE, Asia DE, Caribbean DE, Canada DE, European DE, US DE. So rather than just describing all of these programs, we're going to hear directly from someone who has experienced them and how that shaped their career. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and pop up a quick poll question just to get a sense of who we have joining us here today. So let's see if you guys can see that. All right, we just want to see, are you currently a certified development educator? So maybe you've done one of the DE programs. If you are a DE, are you considering ICUDE at this point? Are you already an ICUDE? So go ahead and take that poll question there, and maybe just let me know in the chat which was the best class ever. I think I already know October 2024, but go ahead and pop that in the chat as well, and we'll take a look. All right, looks like we have a pretty good mix. We do have a couple ICUDEs on here, so that's awesome, but lots of folks considering it, so that's great. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. I think a couple folks missed it, but that's okay, just to give you guys an idea of who we have online here. Awesome. All right. So today joining us, we have Brent Rempe, who currently serves as the president and CEO of First Alliance Credit Union in Minnesota. Brent holds degrees in economics and entrepreneurship for educators, organizational dynamics, and business administration. And he's completed several certifications throughout his career, such as Certified Credit Union Executive, Certified Credit Union Financial Counselor, Certified Credit Union Investments Professional, Credit Union Business Lending Professional, Certified Credit Union Board Member, and Certified Credit Union Supervisory Committee Member. All that to say, an all-around education enthusiast in my book, but most relevant to today's discussion is that Brent has completed several development educator programs and ultimately earned his International Credit Union Development Educator designation. So today we're going to talk about his journey and what he gained from DE along the way. Brent, so happy to have you. Glad you could join us. How are you today? Oh, we're not hearing you, Brent.
That is because I hit the mute button on my external microphone.
There you
I
are.
apologize. Thank you,
No
Cassie.
worries.
Really glad to be here today.
Awesome. Well, let's take it back to the beginning. How did you first hear about CUDE?
Yeah, so I first heard about CUDE actually when I was working in the school system. My background is in education, or my first half of my career was in education. I was working alongside credit unions, doing financial literacy from the school side. And I was in the Oklahoma Jumpstart Coalition for Financial Literacy. And two credit union employees, Cynthia Campbell, who was at Tinker Federal Credit Union at the time, and Nate Gillen, who was at Weoki Federal Credit Union at the time, they both had CUDE degrees. So as I was interviewing in credit unions, I dug into the DE program even before becoming a credit union employee.
Wow, that's interesting. We don't, hear a lot of folks that hear about the program really before they're even involved in credit unions, but that's really cool.
Yeah, we constantly hear DE is the best kept secret in credit union land.
Yeah.
I guess it wasn't really a secret for me coming in.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, how did they explain it to you? Did it ultimately live up to that explanation? How was it pitched?
Yeah, so it was pitched as a way for me to learn more about the credit union system, the credit union movement, and learning that, the whole people helping people ethos. And I certainly think it did live up to that expectation.
Awesome. So, okay, you weren't in the credit union space when you first heard about it. Tell us about your move into the credit union space, and then where did you start that DE journey from there?
Yeah, certainly. So it was in 2014. I was actually, you mentioned my master's in economics and entrepreneurship for educators. So I went back to school to get a master's to learn how to better teach financial literacy, economics, and those entrepreneurship concepts. And I ended up liking the material so much, I wanted to transition into finance.
Mm.
So getting networking with credit union professionals, Nate Gillen, who was at Weoki at the time, reached out to me and asked me to apply for a job running the educational programs at Weoki. They heard I was running financial literacy programs at the school, working with their sister credit union in Tulsa, and opened up over 660 children's savings accounts. So that was really that network, that Oklahoma Jumpstart Coalition, is what got me into credit unions, those relationships.
Hmm.
And then DE came about a year and a half into my credit union journey. And coincidentally, every single day, I've always worked with underserved populations, students from college all the way through 2014, so for about a decade, and had so much meaning and purpose in serving the underserved through education that when I first got to credit unions, I had trouble making sense and seeing where I fit and actually having
Hmm.
that job bring meaning and purpose. So DE came at the right time. And after DE, I would say is really, really committed to becoming a credit unionist, if you will.
Yeah. Man, I love that perspective. I think, a lot of us kind of stumbled upon credit
Yeah.
unions within our careers, some folks as a tellers or, within
Yeah.
the association space. So, and we find that purpose after the fact. And I think a
Right.
lot of times when we talk about DE, we say that as well, right? That we want to make jobs into careers and, for people to feel how they're giving back to their community. So to see it from the other side, that you were someone who was motivated to give back to your community, motivated to get into financial literacy, and you found credit unions from there, and then CUDE really helped you connect the dots between the two.
It did, and it's kept me in credit unions. And it's also why I chose to advance my career in credit union space as well.
Love that. All right, so tell me about that very first DE experience. And so for you, we're talking about USDE particularly, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And it was in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a class of September 2015, best class ever.
Love
Again,
it.
about a year and a half into my job at WFCU, kind of questioning where I fit as far as, that desire to give back, that desire to make a difference in the world, and wasn't quite 100% seeing. Well, I certainly saw that I was making an impact in my team members' lives through education and even through the financial literacy in the community, really struggled to see the broader picture.
Hmm.
And it was that DE experience. So my very first DE class, again, September 2015, I think the thing that I remember most about it, um, first of all, the exposure to the movement, but then also the relationships were key. And the relationships developed over that week together.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of folks from my own DE class that I'm still really close with, so I can definitely see that. Was there a specific activity or exercise or conversation during that week that really sticks with you?
So the activities that stood out from DE, and I believe the two things that really stood out and that I've also implemented with my team throughout, and they're not necessarily still in the USDE program, but there was a poverty simulation where
Mm.
we each took a persona of someone who's underserved and really went through, I believe, a month in the life of someone living in poverty. That simulation was incredibly valuable because it is incredibly stressful. Even though it was an hour long, the weeks were 15 minutes each, and to live, some of us had that lived experience, and others of us did not. But to be able to simulate that experience was incredibly meaningful. And also at that time, we mystery shopped alternative financial institution. Well, it could have been a bank or a credit union, but then also like a payday lender. I personally
Mm.
remember going to a buy here, pay here dealer with a classmate, and
Mm.
that stood out.
Wow, I imagine that was a pretty powerful experience to be able to kind of connect some of those dots from an individual perspective.
And
So
to see, yeah, and to see how alternative finance treats people as well. We have these perceptions that aren't necessarily true.
yeah. So after you came out of that first DE experience, what were the immediate impacts on your career? Did that kind of shape your next steps forward or your day to day?
Yeah. So the very first thing I did, learning about principles and philosophies of credit unions, what we stand for, the social goals, that immediately connected to me because of my background. And I thought it was now my responsibility of going through DE to be able to spread that to my coworkers at WIOKI. So the very first DE project I did was actually putting together a 2-hour training on
Mm.
credit union principles and philosophy. And I was able to offer that to employees at WIOKI. Coincidentally, I was in grad school at the time as well. So with that, was able to knock out two grad school projects. One was developing again, a 2-hour training. And then the other, I had to submit something to a conference as part of a grad school assignment. And so I
Mhm.
submitted my training to the Association for Cooperative Educators Conference in Calgary, Canada, which took place in summer of 2016. So I was able to
Wow,
present the workshop I developed as my DE project to a group of cooperators as well.
that's awesome. So already getting more involved in the broader cooperative movement. Love
Yeah,
that.
very much so.
So, I mean, that kind of lends us to our next question here. So, after your first program, what then led you to doing additional DE programs? How did that happen?
It's interesting. I mentioned ACE, the Alliance for Cooperative Educators. That conference, I met a young lady named Lacey Shoes. And right out of college, I did AmeriCorps and served 2 years at a De La Salle North Catholic High School in Portland, Oregon, working with a work study program, serving kids or students. And she was a Canadian. She did a 2 hour program, or 2 year program. I believe it was with the Cooperative Development Foundation of Canada. And she was actually working alongside credit unions in Malawi for 2 years out of college. And so talking to her and about her experiences, I immediately connected with her because I did AmeriCorps. So we both did 2 years of postgraduate volunteer service. The fact that she did it in Africa and Malawi, that's what led me to reach out to Lois Kitch. And I'm asked, hey, do you have any opportunities to, do something to take steps towards that international CUDE program? And she was actually, Lois in 2017 was bringing a group over, United States credit union folk over to Kenya in summer of 2017. She invited me at that time. So I knew about a year in advance that I was prepping to go to Kenya with a group of credit union, credit union development educators.
Oh, okay. So, how did that additional program kind of expand on what you learned in USDE to start with?
Yeah, it was actually a workshop, so it was an international workshop, and it was my very
Okay.
first. So I went from I've only that was my first real. I've gone to Canada, obviously, went to Calgary, and I see Kathy Stats in the chat says that's where she met me first, and so Kathy is also a mega DE and has done several
Yeah.
DE programs. I met her back in 2016, but that going to Kenya in 2017. I'd gone to Canada, I'd crossed the border into Mexico. This was my first off-continent trip. So skipped Europe. Well, actually went to Europe as my halfway point, but skipped clearing customs in Europe. And my first significant international travel was to Kenya. And so with that, it just opened my eyes to different cultures. I mean, I've always loved different cultures. I'd consider myself xenophilic versus xenophobic. Xenophobic being kind of adverse to other cultures or have
Mhm.
some kind of fear of other cultures. I've always been excited about other cultures, but my experience had been mostly US based. And just be able to expand that and see my friends in Kenya, credit union professionals in Kenya going through some of the same challenges we are, some of the same experiences we are. Just being able to connect relationally. One thing that's really important to me is relationship and relationship with others. And being able to connect with people from a completely different lived experience from halfway across the world was a very powerful experience. And I think I also realized that credit unions across the world are fighting the same problems, whether that's youth, getting the message across, trying to spread the credit union difference, marketing, advocacy, etc., regulation.
Yeah. Well, clearly impactful in your
Mm.
professional journey. Take us back to your credit union at the time. So you're completing Africa DE. How did that impact your day to day, or where were you in that professional journey at that point?
Yeah, so completed my first international program. So following that was actually what led me, that international workshop is what led me to go back to Africa. I went to the Gambia in February of 2018.
Okay.
Meanwhile, on that first trip, I met David Mategwa. He's chairman of the board of Kenya Police SACCO, or Kenya
Mhm.
Police Credit Union. I believe now it's Kenya National Police, or Kenya National Police Deposit Taking SACCO is their full name. And so he's chairman of the board. Met him. He had a project that I visited in Kenya. It's at Don Bosco Special School in Likuani, Kenya. Yeah, I butchered it. Kenya National Police Deposit Taking SACCO. There we go. But it visited his project at a school in Kenya, and I really connected. I connected with it was a parochial school, so Don Bosco Special School. Walking on that first international workshop, we did that site visit, and Father Peter, who was the parish priest for the school, took my hand and said, "You, sir, are coming back to teach at this school." That really took me off guard. And that also started me on my first international DA project in collaboration with David Mategwa, Uh, I was able to bring in, channel some resources and crowdfund, eventually over a few years, 70,000 US dollars, working with ACOSCA, the African Confederation of Savings and Credit Cooperatives, to build infrastructure at that school. But that's
Mm.
also, so that project then led me to seek Africa DE, and I went through that class in the Gambia in 2018.
Wow. So much like one domino effect, one
Yeah,
after the other with each of
it
these
is.
programs.
Something always leads to what's next, and I find throughout life, I'm always prepared for what I'm tackling now because of the sum of all my experiences. And
Uh,
DE is certainly a part of that.
so you mentioned after your first DE program, you were able to kind of do a staff training on what you learned
Yeah.
as a part of that. Were there specific things from Africa DE and the international workshop you did that you were able to apply back home as well?
Yeah, for me, that's really more about the relationships. I think anytime I've done a DE program, and yeah, an American DE, an African DE, an advanced African DE, a European DE. I've mentored a lot. So I've mentored 7 times and facilitated or co-facilitated twice. So with that, I learn something new every time. Like I go through and I feel through a DE program, there's something that I need. There's some just-in-time education, regardless of where and when, that I can immediately apply back home. I think, the 2018 is a little fuzzy. It's pre-pandemic, but I can
Sure.
share with you my most recent course was DE Europe in August of 2025. And going through DE Europe, I was able to bring a lot of those lessons back into my strategic planning with my board and my management team back at First Alliance.
Mm.
And so to me, I think it's important anytime we go out, whether that's a local conference, a statewide conference. Actually, today in Minnesota, we're hiking our local hill in St. Paul, Minnesota. So our local GAC, we call it Impact Day. Regardless, anytime we're out of the credit union, I think it's incredibly important that we bring lessons back in, whether that's a training, conference, GAC, government affairs, etc. And DE is no different than that.
Um, Okay, I feel like we maybe skipped over part of the middle here. So when we started your journey, you came in kind of as an educator with your first
Sure.
credit union in the kind of financial literacy space. And we know that you're now CEO. Take us through the journey between the two and maybe how DE played a role in that.
Yeah. I think the thing about DE that was most impactful against the relationships, and it was specifically relationships with CEOs. So there's a
Mm,
number of CEOs that throughout my DE experience that have been involved. Most notably, I do want to mention again the late Pat Wessenberg. She passed away in 2021, but she was my mentor in 2015. I traveled to Kenya with her in 2017, traveled to the Philippines and Thailand with her in 2018. So my relationship with Pat is incredibly special. Uh,
mm,
but then additionally, after our first trip to Africa, my first trip to Africa was with Mary Beth Spuck. She's now CEO of Resource One in Dallas. And immediately after we returned from that exposure tour or that international workshop in Kenya, she became CEO. So again, building that relationship and staying connected with her because of our shared experience in Africa was important. I've also met Kathy Chartier and Joanne Todd. They're two CEOs from Connecticut along the way. Bert J. Hash Jr., who was CEO at the time, he's now retired, but CEO of MICU in Baltimore. So these relationships with people I'm traveling with or going through DE with were key. And just talking, I believe there's a saying, you are the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, or the
mm.
5 people you closest. So spending time with these folks, I feel like they saw something in me and spoke something into me that made me seek this journey. And so from there, from Wioki, I went to Allegiance Credit Union, was able to take on some marketing and lending experience. Allegiance is in Oklahoma City. It was 270 million when I started. It's now about a $350 million shop, and it's a job I had immediately preceding CEO. But it's really those mentors along the way, those people that saw something in me that encouraged me to seek out opportunities in the credit union system.
That's awesome. I think it's hard not to go through, a week-long experience with
Yeah.
especially your immediate DE group and
Yeah.
not form strong relationships. So love to hear that. I'm gonna pop in just quickly to give a little bit of an overview for I think we have some folks that aren't yet DEs and also the folks that were interested in ICUDE. So obviously Brent has alluded to several of the programs. So we do have 7 DE programs throughout the world. So your first step towards ICUDE, if you're looking at it, would be to do your local or regional program. So you can scan that QR code in the corner there. That'll lead you to our website, and you can click through to whichever one might be your local or regional program. From there, if you want to continue on to ICUDE, you'll be looking to do a second DE program, so another one other than your domestic DE, similarly to what Brent went on to do in Africa. Obviously, our DE programs do include a study project, a community project. You would learn more about that during your DE programs. But after completion of that project, you'd be eligible to apply for your ICUDE. And you would be completing it by attending a global conference. Most commonly, that's the World Credit Union Conference, which we'll be happy to touch on the next upcoming one at the end of our session here today. But also, there are other international conferences, so outside of whatever your national conference may be, that would apply as well. So again, you can scan that QR code to our website to get more information. Our application period for ICUDE this year goes through mid-April, so be sure to take a look if you are interested in doing that. I'll leave this slide up for just a second here. But I want to jump back, Brent. Obviously, we heard you've done several other certifications, and I was just curious how the DE experience compared to some of those other experiences, who you would recommend what for at what stage in their career, maybe.
Certainly. I think I was very fortunate to have DE. It was at a time when I was kind of questioning my fit in the credit union industry. So I was very fortunate that it came at that time early in my career. I do think what I've loved about DE, I've in my small group, Crystal Long, who is retiring, I believe, at the end of next month. She's GECU in El Paso. She was in my small group in DE. And she had been in the movement for 20 plus years. And she said something to the effect of how much she learned, even with her tenure in the movement. So I think for me, it was really important for DE to happen early in my tenure. However, I think there's something to learn regardless of your tenure in the credit union movement with DE. I think I did go through CUNA or Credit Union Management School. Now, since it's America's Credit Union Management School in Madison, Wisconsin. Personally wish I finished during my first year as CEO. Personally wish that would have come maybe a little bit earlier in my career, maybe right after DE, because I think that could have been really helpful in developing myself in credit union management earlier on in my career. Because I think a lot of what I learned in management school was self-taught by the time I got to management school. Some of the other programs like the investment professional, credit union board member, I think were timely throughout the career, things I've picked up as I've needed to learn a little bit more about running a credit union.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that was really evident to me in my own DE journey, and something they do in USD as well as people come in and they don't tell you anybody's title right
Right.
until the end, which is kind of a fun thing, but I think it became very evident throughout the week. Well, one, why that is, but that it is really something for everybody, right? So I feel like no matter what stage in your career you're in, it re-energizes your passion for what you're doing. So if you're early career, maybe more likely that will keep you around a little longer, have you
Yeah.
drink the Kool-Aid a little earlier, and maybe for those of us who need some reinvigorating, just helpful to make those connections. So, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense that some of these other certifications are maybe, obviously a little bit more specific to the role that you might be in right then,
Sure.
but the DE education is really going to be evergreen throughout your credit union journey.
Yeah, I think that's really well said and great paraphrase.
Love it. All right. So, as someone who has experienced multiple DE programs, what you might have touched on this a little bit, but is there something you would recommend as far as what each one offers that maybe the others don't? Did you feel like it was a lot of redundant information?
So for me, I'm mostly exposed, more closely exposed to the U.S. program, the European program, and the African program. And I think there's one common thread throughout many of the DE programs. Lois Kitch, throughout her career, has touched many of the programs. I think she's gone through everyone that's still, except for maybe Carib, but she's gone through everyone except for Carib or helped early on in the tenure of each of those programs. Carib and Canada, I don't think she's done. So there's certainly some commonalities there because of Lois, I believe. So I think those programs have a lot of similarities. My experience in Canada, I mentored in Canada in 2018. And with Canada DE at the time, I noticed, and I hear it's still the same, it's based at University or St. Mary's University in Halifax, which at their cooperative center. And
Mhm.
that DE program takes a broader perspective at cooperatives and the cooperative principles and values. And that's also where I was introduced for the first time to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And I now that's since been introduced to Africa and the United States as well, but that was the first time I was introduced there. I want to say from my experience, uh, I mentored the second Canada DE, and we had a number of people from Carib DE there. What I've learned from then, I don't know if this is true because I don't have firsthand experience. Crib DE seems to be leadership oriented, a little more so, maybe a little more focused on general leadership than some of the other programs. Canada, in addition to having some cooperative experience, had a little bit of that as well. And I think the three programs, Africa, United States, and Europe, that I'm most intimately familiar with, it's all about how credit unions can solve problems for the underserved, regardless of where we are. And of course, there's an international flair taking some of the current trends and current things that are going on in each of those countries, or each in those continents. But in reality, I think we are globally are experiencing so many of the similar challenges.
Yeah. I definitely think they all have their own flavor, but of course they
Yeah.
all come out with similar goals. So, anybody in the chat who's gone through one or multiple, if you want to shout out some of your favorite parts of the various programs, I'm sure folks would love to see that. We're also going to have some time for questions here at the end. So, any questions you have for Brent or myself, feel free to put those in the Q&A, and we'll get to those shortly. All right, well, coming up on some of our final questions here, just some general advice you might have for anyone considering the DE journey or working towards ICUDE specifically. What would you tell them?
I would say do it. To me, and try and say yes. To me, I think there's something about the art of saying no in many cases, but for me, leaning into DE, I think really helped me build my own confidence as a credit union professional. It helped me transition from an educator into a credit union leader and a credit union executive. It's those relationships, that experience, and that broad knowledge that then led me to seek some of those additional certifications or learnings along the way. And then I know if sometimes, especially in the United States, I think before COVID, I want to say there was only a handful of percentage of people like I can't remember the statistics, but it was really low, the number of people who had passports. And so I think traveling internationally is something that in the United States we maybe don't do as much. And it can be intimidating. I think going to Kenya for the first time as my first international trip was intimidating. I get made fun of because I packed two huge carry-on or huge check bags for a 2 week journey. I can now get into a carry-on for my trip. But I think it's just embracing the uncomfortable, and because that's where you know you're in a growth mode is when you're a little uncomfortable. So I think just take the step, and I encourage you if you're on this webinar, you obviously have an interest in it, and reach out to Cassie and see how to get started, see what the clear next step is for you.
Yeah. I guess taking it from a little bit of a different angle, you mentioned the folks who are on here are obviously interested in some capacity. But you yourself, being a CEO, you might be able to give us a little bit of perspective. If there are folks on here who have the interest, taking a look at the ROI perspective, and going to their leadership, if they're in a position that they need to get permission or maybe can't self-fund, do you have any maybe specific talking points for them as far as, here's the value of it, how should they present it to their leadership?
Yeah. Yes, but I will answer. Just wanted to share that at the very first, my first experience in Africa, I was very fortunate to have I was in school at University of Oklahoma seeking a master's degree, and they provided some funding for my first two trips to
Hmm.
Africa. So I think that was very fortunate. The credit union did not support me on along my international journey. So I think there's ways to get creative. I know several of the leagues, at least at one point, and I was a recipient because I was slotted to go through Europe DE in 2021, but the 2021 class was canceled because of COVID. But I had at one point there was a Dick Einsweiler scholarship at the Cornerstone Credit Union Foundation. with the
Mhm.
Cornerstone League. I'm not sure that still exists, but I was a recipient of that and could have gone to Europe DE with support from my league. So I'd encourage you to reach out um, to some alternative funding sources, but of course, getting the blessing of your credit union leadership. For me too, I think that the value, it is obscure and sometimes it seems like it might be excessive, but looking at, let's say, Europe DE, for instance, a trip from Minneapolis, St. Paul to Dublin was cheaper than for me getting from Minneapolis, St. Paul to DC for whatever
Mm.
reason. And then the conference price or the DE price was no different than not that much different or out of line. So it was really affordable, especially when you compare it to the United States, some of these United States all-in prices for some of the different conferences in the US, whether that's GAC or I know America's Credit Unions has a number of conferences. So I would try to go at it from a perspective of maybe that last conference you went to and do some price comparison first of all, and just show that it's maybe not as excessive as someone might think, because I think there's a perception about going internationally, again, seems a little maybe obscure for some leaders. But then I also think bringing it back and what you can bring back and coming up with your own talking points of what you can bring back. For me, just being able to integrate my learnings and also train the team on what I brought back or what I learned has been key.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my next question here. I mean, maybe what would you say to even your fellow CEOs who might say, why should I go international? I'm needed here at home. What can they learn going internationally that you would encourage them to do so?
Yeah, every single time I'm away from the credit union, for that week, I'm able to just take a step back. And so there's, I think, experiential learning. So not only is DE an experiential learning, being able to reflect on your learnings is part of experiential learning. And so being away from the credit union, having time to disconnect from the credit union is a way for me to apply my learnings. And so
Mm.
I really think it's important for every CEO to be out of the office for a week at a time every here now and again to be able to disconnect and really see things from a more global perspective because when you're in the office it's so much day to day that you might have blinders on.
Gotcha. Great advice. All right, let's jump over to a couple of the questions we have here. Do you have to complete your study program before doing the International DE program? So the program itself, no, you do need to complete your study program or your study project before you would receive your ICUDE designation. But to go on to do a second International DE program, you don't have to complete your project first, if that makes sense. So you would have done your local domestic DE, you go on to do a second DE program, and you'll want to complete or have a good semblance of your community study project before you apply for your ICUDE. So I hope that makes sense, but feel free to put some follow up in there if it doesn't. I don't know, Brent, did you want to touch a little bit on maybe what your project was?
Yeah. So for DE or international DE, I believe was able to work a little bit on the school in Kenya by that time. So I became an international DE in 2018 is when I applied for the program, and it happened to be the same year I went through Africa DE, and I was working on that project in Kenya. So there's that school that David Mategwa took me to, Don Bosco Special School in Likwani, Kenya, and immediately went home. And my wife was actually a Catholic school educator at the time. And it being a parochial Catholic school, I was able to connect just because of my network, was able to direct connect Don Bosco to Mount St. Mary's in Oklahoma City. And for a while, when we were both there, the Mount St. Mary's kind of had a special interest and was our fiscal sponsor for the project. And so that was what I believe is what propelled me into international and ICUDE. Now, Cassie, I don't think the project necessarily needs to be an international scope. Is that correct? It can be a local scope as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure. That's a good clarification there as
yeah,
well. So,
yeah.
we definitely expect that your ICUDE education will inspire a lot of local impact as well. So, don't feel that your study project, like you said, has to be on an international scope. You can absolutely be impacting your local community with what you learned internationally. All right, I think this one is probably referring back to what we just chatted about, but Justin asked, what's the best way to build a business case for why my institution should allow me to attend ICUDE. What additional benefit comes compared to your local DE?
Yeah, I think it's just a different perspective and be able to see things differently. Again, a lot of that experience, again, to just go back to that experiential learning. Not only going through the experience, but then reflecting on your learning is key and what you can apply to. So I would focus on coming up with a business case for what you can apply or what you think you can apply based on your experience with your local DE. Maybe talk to
Hmm.
some international credit union development educators or people who've gone through the international programs, or speak to the director of the international program to try and help make that case. But I think it's incredibly important to personalize the case to your individual credit union or institution or
Hmm.
organization. And so that's going to look into your own position. So it's going to be look different for everyone.
Yeah. We talk a lot about at the foundation about kind of the domino effect of going international with your education. And so I think where, say you're in the US, you might do the USDE and be re-energized a lot about impact you want to make on your community. I would argue that going international with your DE experiences gives you kind of the how and some additional ideas of
Yeah.
other ways to make that impact. So I think, especially when you are in the U.S. credit union system specifically, you might see a certain way of doing things that you're used to, or maybe some ways that aren't accessible to you yet, depending where you are in your career. And then going internationally, you meet some of these other folks, especially, on my end in the Y Cup emerging leader space as well, where there are these emerging leaders who, have gone already into their community and are having this incredible impact, forming their own YP programs, forming their own relief programs, whether it's for hurricane
Sure.
relief or whatever it may be. And a lot of those folks were engaged internationally and inspired to start these programs by meeting other international colleagues through DE. And so I think if you are a leader considering sending one of your staff through DE and then onto an international program, just know that they're going to be coming back with a lot of ideas and
Yeah.
I think the energy to follow through on them without necessarily seeing all the barriers that might be there. I feel like they come in with this fresh, get it done energy and just knowing that they can jump in and make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Cassie. And it's looking for ways to say yes rather than being like jaded by the system or jaded by the day to day.
Hmm.
Just that new energy and that new excitement.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways too, it's not necessarily waiting for opportunities to come up at your credit union. Of course, it is great when they put that hand out to you,
Right.
but knowing that you can kind of take some of that impact work into your own hands and get things started, and a lot of times those leadership opportunities follow after that.
Yeah, they do, and that's certainly what the case with me and my career.
Yeah. All right, seeing a lot of questions and one in the Q&A about funding as well. Certainly a question that we generally get when we do this webinar. So we have one, do you have to self-fund or build the cost into your professional development plans? And the answer there is that it varies. So we do have some folks who are able to self-fund, and that's great. There are others, especially like you mentioned it in the States, where sometimes the league foundations or more local foundations might be able to provide assistance there. We do have some folks who their actual credit union is able to fund their journey. So it kind of just depends. I would start with your local resources first. If you're having trouble getting connected with those, of course, reach out to us and we'll see, what we can do to connect you to funding there. We're always working at the foundation to see how we can help further. But definitely start locally, start with your credit union and any local foundation that you have. They might already have an existing program. And to Brent's point earlier, there might even be other, educational opportunities outside of the credit union space that would fund this as well. So I don't know if you had any additional points there, but definitely it varies overall.
I think credit union development education aligns well to the Rotary Club. So I'm again not sure
Hmm.
that there's necessarily that's something to necessarily fund, but I do know Rotarians in DE seem to have some synergy, and it's a worldwide social organization. So I'd even encourage you to have some conversations with your local Rotary Club.
Yeah, love that. Great connections all around. All right. I see a question here about Europe DE schedule. So definitely I'll pop my screen share back up here. If you head to our website, there's an email address on there. You should be able to reach out, Jody, and get more information about the European schedule specifically.
I
Uh,
believe it starts on September 16th of this year and goes through the 22nd.
oh, perfect. Love that. All right. Not sure if I see any additional questions there, so I'm going to go ahead and pop up my screen. This webinar was recorded, so you guys will be able to reference back this information and share it out as well. But thank you, Brent, so much for sharing your journey towards ICUDE with us. I think we all learned a lot here. I'm not sure if you had one final piece of advice or any parting notes you wanted to leave with us.
Yeah, again, I just encourage you to get started. And if you have one takeaway or one piece of action, what is and I'd like you to answer this on your own and independently, what is your clear next step to becoming an ICUDE? So it feels insurmountable. You'd mentioned going through your local program, doing a project, going to an international education program, and then applying for DE. But just everyone has their own clear next step because we're all at different parts of our DE journey. I would encourage you
Mhm.
to define your clear next step personally.
Love that. Thank you so much, Brent, for joining us. I know we have a lot of additional comments in the chat, so we'll be sure to get back to those individually and see what other questions we can answer. But if you're interested in learning more about these programs or exploring the DE journey overall, we do encourage you to visit doglobalgood.org/ICUDE. And remember that our application period for this year's ICUDE designation ends April 10th, so don't wait on getting your applications in there. Again, this webinar was recorded, so you'll be able to refer back to it as well. And you'll also find many other helpful webinars at that website. And of course, if you want more education from World Council and from the Foundation, you really can't beat attending the World Credit Union Conference, which this year will be held in Sydney, Australia, 19 to 22 July. Registration with early bird pricing is still available, so go ahead and head to wcuc.org for more information on that. And finally, if you are there, we definitely want to see all of our DE friends at the DE Social in Sydney. It's always a good time to see everybody and all of the enthusiasm and energy in that room. So go ahead and scan that QR code for more information on that and to register. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye bye.